This podcast contains our own personal views, not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to Coronial, everyone. I'm Alice.
I'm Georgie.
I'm Emma.
So today I'm going to be telling you about the inquest into the deaths of Jade Marie Langlodes, Rory Duncan Langlodes, and Nathaniel Jake Rose. The inquest was held because the deaths were a result of an accident. On the afternoon of Wednesday, the 22nd of January 2003, Michelle Rose was driving along the Stewart Highway near Katherine in the Northern Territory with her children, Jade, Rory, and Nathaniel. Jade was 8 years old, Rory was 7, and Nathaniel was 2.
Oh.
Yeah.
No. And the mum's still alive.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So Michelle had picked Jade and Rory up in Darwin after they had been visiting their father in Adelaide, and they were heading back home to Katherine.
That is one long distance.
That's a commute.
Between your parents. Okay.
Near the Edith River Bridge, they were travelling approximately 120 kilometres per hour, which was legal because it's a speed unlimited road at that point.
I forget that we have them.
At least it was back then.
It's now 130.
Oh, right.
Is that the limit?
Yeah, it's now capped at 130.
Yeah.
So as they were travelling along, the car hit a metal plate on the road. This punctured the rear left tyre, which caused the tread to be blown off the tyre.
Yeah.
Because they were going at such high speed.
Yeah.
And because of the impact. The car lost control, rotating clockwise and sliding across the right-hand lane. When it reached the erosion strip that separated the north and southbound bridges, it rolled, with the roof being crushed by the rocks on the riverbank.
Oh.
The car was stopped briefly by a sapling on the riverbank before the current washed the car downstream.
Oh, wow. Wow, this is escalating so much more than I was expecting.
Yep. Michelle wasn't able to open her door, so she knocked out the driver's side window and reached for her son Rory, who was sitting next to her in the passenger seat.
Mm-hmm.
She exited through the window, holding Rory's hands as she tried to get him out, but this was difficult because she was trying to get in between the crushed roof and the centre console.
Yeah.
So it's not like the car was still completely intact and she could get him out. The car suddenly went nose down and sunk under the water. Michelle tried to dive to find the car, but she was unable to.
Oh my God. That's horrible.
Yep. She then went back up to the road to flag someone down to help. A vehicle, which had just moved lanes to avoid objects in the road, stopped to help. While the passenger of the car stayed with Michelle, the driver drove away from the scene so he could get reception on his phone.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to call 000 when he was 15 kilometres away, and then after that he returned back to the bridge.
That's so far away.
Yeah.
I thought you meant he was just like slightly up the road.
Yeah, no, you had to travel 15
kilometres. Wow.
Yeah. Police were the first emergency service on the scene because they had been responding to another accident on the Stewart Highway, so they were reasonably close. When they arrived, they were told the car had been underwater for 26 minutes. One of the police officers had a rope in his car, which he tied around himself, and he then went into the water to try and find the car.
That is brave.
Yeah.
Okay.
So are there crocodiles?
They didn't go into that, actually.
That's what I would be thinking.
The current was fast and the water was brown with poor visibility, so the police officer wasn't able to find the car. There was another police officer who had also dived in to try and find the car, and they couldn't find it either. Other police officers and fire service members attended, and they were eventually able to find where the car was, but they couldn't necessarily get to it.
Yeah.
A group of territory response divers were notified at 5:30 p.m. of the accident. They left Darwin at 6:30 p.m. and arrived to the scene at 9:10 p.m. One of these divers entered the river at 9:40 and removed the children from the car one at a time. Nathaniel and Jade were still wearing their seatbelts.
Yeah. They were the two youngest, right?
In the back.
Yeah. Their cause of death was drowning as the result of a motor vehicle accident, which is not surprising.
I'm surprised that they pressed on versus waiting for the next day from a safety perspective.
I think it's probably the fact that it was like 3 young children.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, the mother did everything she could to try and get to them.
Yeah. It would have been a horrendously emotional situation.
Yeah.
I get that. But I'm like, from a safety of the people doing it, though,
Yeah.
that you got to always worry about their safety as well.
Yep.
You don't want more casualties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The police found 2 metal Grouser plates. I'll go into what those are a little bit later.
I like that you already expect me to be like, the fuck are they?
Well, yeah, I had no idea. And a piece of disc rotor on the road. The coroner was satisfied that the damage to the rear left tyre of Michelle's car was due to one of these plates.
Yeah.
And from the inquest, it seems like there was a significant amount of investigation that went into finding out where the metal plate had come from.
Oh, okay.
At the end of the day, does it really matter?
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
Yes,
it does matter.
Yep. 2 days after the accident, the police returned to Darwin and visited a Caterpillar equipment dealer. So when I say Caterpillar, I mean like the
Tractor.
bulldozers, yeah, all of those. So that they could try and identify the plates. The police also contacted trucking companies and industrial machinery suppliers and found that there was only 1 load of plates of that kind being transported around the Northern Territory at that time. So that's how in-depth they went into it. Is it possible that it could come from
Interstate.
1 or 2 trucks or, yeah, but went as far as checking the whole of the Northern Territory to see what was being trucked around.
That's so extensive. Okay.
So the metal plate had fallen off a road train which was travelling from Darwin to Perth. The road train was carrying a bulldozer on the first trailer, bulldozer blades in the centre of the second trailer, and a shipping container at the rear of the second trailer. On the front right of the second trailer were drill rods and 3 pallets of excavator track plates, also called Grouser plates.
Right.
So these are the plates that go on the wheels of the bulldozer. They're like the little tank track things.
Oh.
The go round. Yeah. They're the caterpillars of the, yeah.
Or like a chain link,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah.
So she hit one of them.
Yes. It obviously was not on the excavator at the time. But
Yeah, it was a plate.
It was loose.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification.
She hit the excavator. No.
It's not flat?
No.
Yeah, I suppose when you said metal plate, I initially thought like manhole cover type.
Yeah,
plate.
no, I think it needs to have shape so that it
can go around.
dig
Yeah.
into the dirt when it's
Yeah, that's the point of it,
Yeah.
right?
quite heavy duty.
How big are they? Do you have like a size dimension?
I don't actually,
Okay, that's okay.
but I assume reasonably big.
And like how heavy they are?
Also didn't go into that.
And like
Okay.
how visible they would have been when you were driving along.
Yeah, I have so many questions.
That were not answered by this
No,
inquest.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
Because I think at the end of the day that
It doesn't really
wasn't
matter.
necessarily
Yeah,
the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact that they could figure out the one truck that they
Yes.
came from is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The truck driver had been driving between Perth and Darwin for about 5 years before the accident, so this was a regular route that he took. His route on the 22nd of January meant that he passed over the Edith River Bridge. So it was confirmed that he did travel across the bridge
Yeah.
on that day.
Because it definitely was him, essentially.
Yes.
And the plate would have only been on the road that
Yeah,
day.
that day.
Yeah.
In January 2003, so the start of the year, about 95 Grouser plates from a Caterpillar excavator were being stored in the yard of a Caterpillar equipment dealer in Adelaide. The dealer was moving sites, so the plates had to be removed. On the 21st of January, so the day before the accident, a truck driver with 15 years of experience, who was employed by Shaw's Darwin Transport, arrived to move the plates to Shaw's Darwin. He refused to take the load because one of the pallets was broken and 2 of the pallets had loose strapping. He only saw these 2 pallets before making this decision. He didn't see the 3rd pallet, but seeing the condition of the first 2 was
Yeah,
enough for
he was
him
like,
to be
"No,
like,
I'm
I'm
good.
not taking
I'm out.
this.
Yeah.
He waited at the yard for the load to be repacked and restrapped, but left after about half an hour to an hour, I assume because they were just taking too long.
Interesting. He's like, no, I'm out.
Yeah.
I mean, we have learned that he's probably also got some requirements around how long he's allowed to be trucking
Yeah,
for and all that
probably.
kind of stuff where he's like,
Yeah.
you've taken
Taken
too
too
long.
long.
Yeah.
This will breach my requirements, so I'm out.
The storeman at the warehouse saw that the pallets were very messy and one pallet was decaying. Because these are wooden pallets that they're loaded on. He thought that all the pallets needed to be restacked, but he was very busy and didn't have the time to do it himself.
Classic.
As you do.
The workshop area where the pallets had come from was asked to help with rectifying the pallets, but they also didn't have the time to do it. Eventually, an apprentice diesel fitter was assigned to the task, who had only been employed with the company for 2 weeks.
And was this at all his job or anything that he knew how to do?
No, not by the
Excellent.
sounds of his job title.
Yeah. I was like, is that something a diesel fitter would regularly do?
Not regularly, no.
Yeah, okay.
But he was the one who was available because he's the
He's
apprentice.
the apprentice
so-
Yeah,
who's just
so-
started and is keen to do whatever work he's assigned.
Yep.
Which is such bullshit because, again, you shouldn't assign them things that aren't part of their job. Mm-hmm. Just because they're the most junior does not mean that they
And
will
because they
do
will do it
anything and
because they're
everything.
the most junior and
Yeah.
will push back.
Exactly.
He moved the pallets to the dispatch area and then asked the storeman for help with what to do and how to use the strapping machine. The storeman advised him about how to neaten the piles of plates and helped him to place 1 or 2 load bands, placing them around the load and tensioning them. There was conflicting evidence at the inquest about how many bands he was told to put around each pallet, with the apprentice saying he was told to use 4 and the storeman saying he advised to use 5. And so these are bands that go essentially over the whole pallet to keep. The apprentice was not given specific instructions on how to repack the plates, other than to square them up to sort of neaten them. He was not given any instructions about interlocking the lugs, which would have made the load more stable. So the lugs are the heads of the bolt that come up through the plate.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so if you interlock them, they're just more stable.
Yeah.
At least I think that's what it is.
Interlocking. In what way are they packing this?
They didn't really go into that.
Right, yeah,
they just
okay.
talked about them interlocking.
Just accept that the lugs interlock.
Okay, perfect.
It's a known best practice of how to load these things so they're more
Perfect.
stable.
Excellent. That is all the level of knowledge we need to have. Okay.
The storeman asked his supervisor about the largest pallet, which was the one that was rotting and close to collapse. The decision was made to place this whole pallet onto another pallet, tidy up the stacks, and restrap it. The coroner found that this new pallet was not actually strong enough to bear the load of the old rotting pallet and everything that was on top of it.
Okay.
This was contrary to the Hastings Deering warehouse safety policy, which stated that broken or damaged pallets should be repaired or replaced.
Yes.
So they should have gotten a new
Obviously.
pallet and then taken everything off the old one and put it on the new one.
But they already didn't have enough time to pack the first pallet,
Yeah,
let alone
exactly.
replace everything, right?
Yeah.
Yep. The apprentice gave evidence that the storeman supervised the work. And checked each pallet as it was completed, but the storeman said he was in the area, but not directly supervising, and did not check each pallet. The storeman gave evidence that he wasn't satisfied with the pallets, and they should have had 2 people on the job to restack the pallets properly and reduce the size of the load on the largest pallet.
So why did he allow it?
Good
All right.
question.
Yep. Cool.
Once the work was completed, the supervisor also checked the pallets, which he called a 20-second visual check, and was satisfied.
I'm so confused. He still let them leave, even though he was...
Well, the storeman said, yeah, they're fine, although at the inquest he said he wasn't satisfied with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the supervisor also checked them, but he was like, yeah, no, I thought they were all good. Yeah. The company stated in the inquest that they had no training or experience in stacking this type of plate onto pallets. They rarely sent used Grouser plates out to customers or transported them generally. Because they were the Caterpillar dealer, like they were probably more used to sending out like big equipment, not the components.
But then if you don't have the training, you shouldn't be doing it?
Yeah, or you should make sure you have the training.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of those 2 options would be great.
Yep. Because the pallets hadn't been picked up on the 21st, they were moved from the dispatch area to the backyard of the premises. The next day, a truck driver with 15 years' experience, also employed by Shaw's, arrived to pick up the pallets. An employee used a forklift to move the pallets onto the back of the truck. Before moving each one, he had a brief look to check that they were ready to be moved. The truck driver secured the pallets to the truck with 1 or 2 webbed straps over the pallet. The pallets were moved to a depot, where they were then loaded onto the road train that would take them to Perth. The head gates and 2 gates on either side of the front trailer were put in place. The 2 drivers placed webbed restraints across each of the pallets, one restraint over pallets 2 and 3, and one right across the trailer. The truck driver who had transported the pallets to the depot said that he did not help the road train driver to place the rear gates on the trailer before it left. Photos taken of the road train in Port Hedland showed the rear gates on the truck. However, the first truck driver gave evidence that if the rear gates were on before the straps were placed, the straps would be over the gates instead of under them.
Right.
And the photos showed that they were under
The gates.
the gates. The road train driver stated that all the gates went on at the same time, but couldn't explain why the straps were under the rear gates, if that was the case.
Yeah, right.
Which makes it seem like they weren't on
It
initially,
doesn't
and
make
then
sense.
they
Yeah.
were put on.
Yeah.
These photos and video also showed that one pallet had loose banding, and a grouser plate was coming through the headboard. The banding was not square on top of the plates, but made a pyramid shape, and there were gaps in the stacking of the load. So clear issues with...
It wasn't stacked properly.
Yeah, it wasn't loaded properly. It wasn't secured properly.
No.
The road train left Darwin around midday on the 22nd of January, going down the Stewart Highway. It drove for 6 or 7 hours, so 600 to 700 kilometres, without a tyre check or a check of the load.
How often are they meant to tyre check?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
He admitted in the inquest that he could not see the metal plates while in the cab of the truck, since the bulldozer obscured them from view. The 1994 load restraint guidelines states that during the journey, the driver should periodically check the load and its restraints to ensure that it cannot become dislodged.
Yeah, but what's periodically?
That's not enough description.
No, that's so vague.
A truck driver who gave evidence at the inquest said that most drivers taking this route would stop at one of 3 locations before they reached Katherine, since the
Okay.
load could settle and the restraints may need tightening. So it was sort of routine for the experienced people to drive at a distance, not sure whether that's like an hour or 2, and then check to see that everything's all good.
Yeah, right.
When the road train driver stopped for the night, he noticed that the bands on the load had come loose, but he didn't notice any gaps in the pallet or plates until the second night of his trip.
At which point he was missing 2 plates, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, even at the end of that first day, he was missing 2 plates because it was the first
It
day
was
that...
in New Catherine, yeah.
But he didn't even notice that on the first night.
Yeah. And, like, it was dusk when he arrived where he was staying for the night, so how good was visibility? Yeah.
Yeah.
The road train driver gave evidence that he assumed the metal plates would be interlocked because this was best practice based on his prior work with Caterpillar plates. He also said that the banding looked new, so he assumed that the load was packed properly and stable.
I mean, I can put new bands on
Yeah, that makes
anything.
nothing.
Yeah. In an interview, when asked whether he had any concerns about the way the pallets were loaded and banded, he said, "I didn't take any notice."
Excellent.
So it's just one of those things that the truck driver assumes that their truck has been packed correctly.
Yeah.
Which, look,
I mean, yeah.
it depends on what level of responsibility you were expected to take. Are you expected to be the truck driver who literally just gets in the cab and drives, or are you expected to be...
It depends on your job description, right?
Yeah.
And your
And
responsibility.
where the chain is in terms of
Yes.
who's packing
But
what.
I guess because at this point he's driving the truck is in his possession.
Yeah.
You would think it's therefore his responsibility
Yeah.
in terms of, the contents of the truck.
And the fact that the first driver who picked them up to take them to the depot said, "No, I'm not doing this," because they're not
Yeah.
packed properly.
Fair.
So clearly they do have some ability to say, "No, I'm not taking this."
Yeah.
The inquest heard evidence that there were other ways of securing a load by using plywood up against the head gate or putting the metal plates into bins where they're then contained.
Yeah,
That
they
makes
can't go
sense.
anywhere, right?
Yeah. The road train driver stated that although ply was available when he picked up the plates, it was only one size and would fly off with the wind pressure. But he did acknowledge that he could have used another gate against the head gate to help secure the load. Other truck drivers stated that the ply could be modified to fit and could be used in a way that it wouldn't fly off during transport.
Yeah, what's worse, the plywood flying off or the whole grouser plate
I mean,
coming
not
off?
either of those options
Yeah.
are ideal.
Yeah, but I feel a bit of plywood's going to be far less likely to puncture a massive hole through my
Yeah,
tyre.
but it depends on the situation. Like, if I was driving behind said truck and a
Yes.
piece of plywood fell off
Fair.
into
then
my
hit your
windscreen,
windscreen.
I mean, I would probably still prefer that over a metal plate,
Grouser plate, yeah.
but it still would really not
Yep.
be good.
Yeah, fair.
Neither's a good option.
No. The driver of the road train pleaded guilty in March 2004 to being the driver of a vehicle towing 2 trailers on the Stewart Highway, carrying a load, failed to restrain said load in a manner described in the publication titled Load Restraint Guide, and he was fined $1,500.
Well, that's fair. He was the driver of the vehicle that had something that was not restrained correctly.
So really oddly, but just
Yes.
for reckless driving. You know, like,
Yeah,
No,
no.
well, I'm sure they would have been very specific in terms of I'm pleading
Yes.
guilty to this, not just to reckless driving. It is-
yeah.
because if you look at his criminal history, then you're like, okay, that's very specific.
Yeah,
Reckless
fair.
driving, not
Yeah.
specific.
Specific
Like,
enough,
what was he
yeah.
doing? Whereas, like, oh, you're like, oh, he just was driving something that was not restrained properly.
Yep.
What do you think about $1,500? It's a really tough one.
It is, isn't it? Because
And you've also got to remember context of the time. Like, this
Yes.
isn't yesterday. This was, 20 years ago now?
Oh, yeah, fair. Okay. So that,
2000,
I don't know,
3,
still
yeah.
1,500 still seems low.
it does, doesn't it?
I'd be expecting somewhere in the tens of thousands.
Or like meant some conditions on his
Yeah.
license, or I don't know, some sort of mandatory training.
Because it resulted in the death of 3 children.
Yeah,
Yeah. But was it his negligence? Yes, obviously.
partly.
In part, it was because
Yeah.
he was one responsible for the truck, but he wasn't the one who packed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And does having the higher fine actually change anything? Does attempting to ruin his life bring back the children?
Yeah.
No.
No. And if you put yourself in his shoes, like, you'd be pretty pissed if you were driving. Again,
Yeah,
you should have
yeah.
checked it, but like,
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's a lot of remorse and it's probably very much changed his practice.
yeah, I'm sure.
But you said he was experienced, but you know, if you're a junior truck driver, you don't have enough experience to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff as well.
But it's also a good sort of precedent in the future to remind truck drivers. It's, that whole general deterrence, reminding truck drivers that they do have that duty
Yeah.
to make sure that their truck is packed properly, and that if they're not comfortable with how it's packed, they can not drive the truck.
And they need to be doing a good nightly check.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have changed anything. But if he'd identified it on day 1, he wouldn't have driven day 2 because potentially more could have fallen off between day 1 and day 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
or
true.
even if he stopped at some point in the 6 hours he was driving to
Yeah.
check.
Yeah.
Because I've got to assume he stopped at
Some
certain
point.
times
Yeah.
because you would
He
need
didn't
to.
drive 6 hours straight
Yeah.
forever. you
But
know, yeah.
he didn't check the load or his tyres like he should have
Yeah.
at those stops. So the coroner was critical of the fact that the driver was identified as carrying this load on the 22nd of January, so the day after the accident.
Yep.
But his police interview only occurred on the 9th of May.
Oh,
Okay, wow.
It's a big gap.
how quickly did they interview any of those warehouse workers as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Which would
Yeah.
have really changed their memory of the actual day's events.
Yeah. This interview was not recorded but was written down and did not explore things like how the load was restrained and the checking of the load during the journey.
That's not best practice.
But hang on. But what did they question him about then? Just be like, hey, did you drive this truck this day?
Yes. So the coroner said that the investigation did not explore broader issues other than the mechanics of the accident and potential offences committed by the driver.
Right, so they're basically trying to pin him down to an offence. So they're
Yeah.
just sort of saying, you were the one who drove the truck this day, correct, blah, 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 and like going down the factual route
Yeah.
of where, when, how, what were you driving, rather than...
But it wasn't really a when, how.
True.
Because, like, they didn't ask those pertinent questions as to how, like, the plates could have actually dislodged from the truck.
No, they didn't care about that. They cared about proving that this guy was driving
Yeah,
the truck
I think
at the
that's
time.
all
And that's
they
it.
were.
Yeah, because
establishing.
that's what they needed to establish the offence.
Yeah, fair. Okay.
Which I'm not saying that that's a good thing.
Yeah,
I'm just saying
but, like,
that's what
that's
they
what
were
they're
doing. They were
focused
just
on.
like, we're going to try and prove that this guy did this offence. Let's just ask questions in relation to that. And
Yep.
not...
Actually care about fixing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So no evidence was gathered of the responsibilities and systems of people or companies other than the truck driver.
That's so harsh. He didn't pack the actual pallet.
Yeah. But they just focused on him from a
Right.
criminal.
Perspective, yeah.
Yeah. There were also some deficiencies and documents missing from the coronial file prepared by the police. The police officers said that this was because they were concentrating on the investigation only in relation to the prosecution of offences rather than from a coronial viewpoint.
That's irrelevant because it's still mandatory.
Yeah.
Yes. So the Assistant Commissioner Crime Support wrote a letter to the Territory Coroner which set out the initiatives that the Northern Territory Police had undertaken to address some of the deficiencies in the preparation of coronial files. These included developing the investigative capacity of members of the Accident Investigation Unit over time. Because of these actions, the coroner did not make any recommendations relating to the quality and timeliness of coronial investigations. So they considered that they had learned their lesson,
which is fair,
from this accident, and that they would improve their processes.
But you just told me that the police commissioner said for our staff of the accident and investigation team, we're going to give them education about accident investigation.
Essentially, but probably also more to do with getting more general details, like getting a more in-depth investigation in terms of the breadth of it, rather than just the mechanics of this is what happened.
Focusing on the...
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just like, isn't it in the title?
Yeah, isn't that what you're meant to do?
I'm confused, but right. It's more about those other generalizable other things that come along with accident investigation.
Yeah.
Okay.
The coroner found that the equipment dealer and trucking companies involved in the sequence of events that led to the accident did not have sufficient training and procedures in place. Shock horror.
Wait, hang on. Yeah, the apprentice didn't have training because it wasn't what he was meant to do.
It's not his job.
Neither of the companies had formal training for load restraint, and the dealer did not have procedures or formal training in the use, packing, or banding of pallets before transport.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yep. Both companies relied on experienced staff to communicate the procedures and safe practices to the junior staff.
Ah, yes.
Always.
Communication is always the most effective, isn't it? We don't need to put any processes and procedures in writing. That's silly.
You know what my favourite is? Verbal communication only.
Oh.
Don't write anything down ever.
No.
Don't write things down. Don't record what you've done.
No
That's
documentation.
Silly.
And also, when you do train the juniors whose job it isn't even to do that.
Yeah, and train them how you've been doing it, which is not necessarily
the
best
correct
practice
way.
either.
Yay.
This has always worked for me, and I might be cutting a few corners, but it's never had any consequence. So, yeah.
Yep.
This is the way I've always done it.
Exactly, and it's always been good, so...
Happy days. No one's written back to say that they lost any plates along the way.
No, and you know what? There's no written procedures, so it's not technically inconsistent with anything.
But on a side note, the trucker's not checking whether it lost any plates along the way anyway, so how much feedback would ever occur along the way?
Exactly.
Great.
Awesome.
Sorry, we are super cynical.
The equipment dealer took a few actions to improve their processes after the accident. They sent a memo to all managers on the 29th of January 2003, so a week after the accident, to reinforce the need to ensure all parts consignments leaving the branches are packed or attached to pallets securely and loaded safely onto transport vehicles.
Wow, they finally have something in writing.
But hang on, but is that just that one sentence or do they give more in-depth detail?
They also provided formal compulsory training to all employees across Australia
Oh, okay.
in June 2004 on the chain of responsibility and the load restraint guideline.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, because I'm like writing a sentence being like, make sure you pack it properly. That doesn't achieve anything.
Yeah, no, this was the initial you really need to check, and then they
Yeah.
followed it up with formal
With
training.
more. Okay, perfect.
Just the way that it's said seems very passive aggressive, you know, when you get feedback from people and they're just like, I just want to remind you that in the future, you should be doing it this way.
The correct way.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels very passive aggressive, but like the fact that it's followed up with proper training is good.
Yeah.
Those who missed the formal training had to do the training by home study, so no one was getting out of this. And it was all employees across the company across Australia.
Love
like,
it.
even if you were an admin, you had to do
That's
this training.
Learn how to pack a pallet.
Yep.
Well, just in case they were asked.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems fair given they just asked some random.
Yeah, exactly. So fair enough.
So, however, after this training, the company identified that it didn't address the basics of loading and banding pallets. So they made a commitment to introduce further training on this.
So I'm sorry, so the training...
To load a pallet didn't
No,
actually
no.
train them.
The training was about the chain of responsibility and the load restraint guideline. But in terms of, like, how do you load a pallet in the first place?
So it was how you restrain the pallet once it's loaded?
Yes.
Right,
but
okay.
They needed to go with
How to
load
actually
them.
load the pallet, which is half the problem in the first place.
But I'm also like, do you not start with step one before
Yeah,
you go to step
exactly.
two? I'm so
You would think
confused.
so.
Okay.
Yeah. They also contacted Caterpillar, so like the company, to get some information about different types of Grouser plates and how they're loaded, and they put photos of these up in the workshop.
Excellent.
Okay.
The trucking company said that they had made commitments to making sure loads are restrained properly, but the coroner did not find any evidence of training on the load restraint guideline. They now include the load restraint guideline in every vehicle and depot, and their employees are used for loading at every available opportunity so they can better control that loading.
Okay.
So they make sure that their staff are responsible. However, they still rely on more experienced staff to tell the junior staff how to restrain loads.
Oh.
Yep. I'm hoping that in the 20 years since this happened,
Yeah,
they have actually documented
Oh,
that now.
they surely would have. Everything's written down these
Yeah.
days. Surely.
So despite the trucking company still relying on oral communication, the coroner commended both companies for their efforts in improving training and procedures since the accident.
Okay.
Which I was like,
but
the equipment dealer seems like they did quite a lot. The trucking company, not as much.
Yeah, but just small clap. Come on. It's like, they've done something.
They have.
They've not ignored the problem.
No. The road and the bridge that were involved were also investigated by the police and the coroner. The part of the bridge that the car was approaching before the accident did not have an extended approach guardrail. The bridge was built in 1972, and a ski jump railing was added in 1973, which was the standard for the time.
Okay.
I had to look this up. A ski jump railing is very basic, and it has 2 or 3 horizontal bars with gaps in between.
yeah, it's
It just reminds me of like your
yeah.
standard like road
Yeah.
guard.
Yeah, but it's not like a proper guardrail.
It's not
that
like the
is-
metal ones, right?
Yeah, it's a fence.
Yes,
It's basically a
it's a
fence,
fence.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
In 1997, an audit found that the approaches to the bridge were a medium risk, but there were higher priority works, so nothing was done about them.
Well, the problem is it's so remote as well.
Yeah.
And like not.
Bang on trucks are driving over this and like
Well, I mean, it's the Stewart Highway. It's the main
Yeah.
highway that connects North and South Australia.
Yep.
but like a fence to stop a truck is not really
It's
super
not going to do
helpful.
anything, but neither's a little guardrails that we have
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
like
fair.
that's not going to stop a truck from falling.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. It's
Yeah.
more to do with a car in this circumstance. But anyway.
In terms of the accident, the vehicle left the road 24 to 25 metres before that rail began.
So,
A report completed in 2004 after the accident found that modifications were necessary to the approach to the bridge.
Yes.
Surprise. In June 2004, an extended guardrail of 48 metres was installed.
oof.
If this had been present at the time of the accident, the car might not have entered the river. But obviously, you can't tell what
Condition
damage
it
would
would
have-
have had. Yeah, if
Yeah.
you get into a guardrail, it's probably not great either.
So,
Yeah.
like, you can't say for sure it would have prevented the deaths, but
Yeah.
it may have.
But she, the mother, was relatively uninjured.
Yes.
In the sense that she could get out, and the son who was he in the front seat?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in the passenger seat.
They didn't report that he was particularly injured either.
Yeah, if the car had just rolled and the river wasn't there, they
It would have
all
been
would have survived.
fine. But if you hit the guardrail, does that impact
Yeah.
change how
Yeah.
much injury there would have been?
Exactly.
I would say it would.
All the whiplash and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends how it hits. It could completely spear the car.
Yeah.
True.
Overall, the coroner found that the deaths of Jade, Rory, and Nathaniel were a result of a number of omissions and accidents. A junior staff member repacked and banded the pallets,
Oh, he's put the junior staff member in there.
Yeah.
Specifically.
and they were incorrectly deemed acceptable by other staff members.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it's really not the junior staff members'
Not
fault.
entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other options for restraining and transporting the plates were not considered, and the truck driver did not check his load throughout the whole day of driving from Darwin.
Yeah.
However, the coroner did note that inspection of the load wouldn't have prevented the plates from falling off because of the inadequate stacking and banding.
In the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, so like even though they're then restraining the pallets down onto the truck, they can't do anything about the restraints that were already on the pallet because
Yeah.
they were already loose.
Yeah.
The coroner's recommendations were the equipment dealer continued to develop and offer training on loading particular materials on pallets. The trucking company provides staff formal training on load restraint methods and develop and document procedures for loading trucks in accordance with the Load Restraint Guide. Northern Territory Police continue to provide the Accident Investigation Unit staff with investigation and interview training to improve the quality and timeliness of coronial investigations. A protocol be developed between the Northern Territory Police and Northern Territory WorkSafe in relation to the reporting and investigation of work-related motor vehicle accidents. and that Northern Territory WorkSafe work with the trucking industry and related industries to provide information on the standards and procedures in the industry in regard to the use of pallets, banding of pallets, and the development of formal training materials on the requirements of the Load Restraint Guide. So essentially everything the coroner had already touched on in terms of training, documenting procedures.
That was the company that was doing it nationally, right, as well? So at least that was like fixing it, even outside of NT.
Yeah. And the coroner did specifically make mention in this that Michelle did everything that she could to save her children.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he absolutely commended her for everything that she did.
Yeah, that would have been the worst however many hours of that evening.
Yeah.
Just knowing that you can't do anything to get to your kids.
Yep. The coroner also commended the car that had stopped to help her.
Yeah.
The fact that that couple stayed with her to sort of try and comfort her as much as they could, so at least she wasn't alone while they were waiting for the police to get there.
That would have such an impact on those two people.
Yes.
How horrific.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess one thing this didn't touch on was like how visible were these plates when they were on the road?
Yeah, it didn't go into that at all. That car that did stop had changed lanes to go around objects in the road.
Yeah, right.
So I think they would have been visible.
Yeah.
But I just guess it depends on
your reaction time as well.
She's got 3 children.
Exactly.
And that she's going at quite a speed, 120.
Yeah.
So maybe they were going slower.
Yeah.
And therefore had more time to notice them and move out of the way.
Also, I guess it depends on what size of vehicle you have as well.
Yeah. And I dare say that the tyre blowing and the car rolling probably would have put some debris on the road as well.
True, yeah.
So that would have been more of a visual marker if there's something on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. How horrible.
So I am very much hoping that in the 20 years since this accident happened that things have improved.
But also, they never prosecuted criminally the company that packed the pallet anyway.
Not that I could find.
Wow.
Which I was surprised by.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Where's that level of responsibility lie? And they're just saying the truck driver should just never put it on the truck. And it's like, well, if the people had packed the pallet correctly, that would have been helpful.
Yeah, even if he hadn't checked his restraints, it wouldn't have mattered because it wouldn't have fallen off.
Yeah. But they've made improvements to their practice, so that's what we want to see, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, as you say, hopefully in 20 years they've now got, probably a fairly systematic approach to doing things.
Yeah.
One would hope that there is a relatively systematic approach to it now to prevent that as a problem.
Yep. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We will catch you again next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.